Welcome to the embassy. For those who don't know this place, it's a house to 15 residents. It's a place that some short-term stayer call home as well. And it's an experiment in living with intention, with purpose, and experimentation, of course. And we are kind of trying to build a society of the future that is more transparent, more collaborative, and more abundant. So, as you see, we have plenty of wine. That's the beginning. As for tonight, tonight is very exciting for us in this salon, since the topic is about counterculture, and when you live at the embassy for a while, you become a bit of a counterculture nerd, I think. So let's question some of our society's paradigms, because it's the best thing, isn't it? About the salon, so there are ways to share knowledge and to learn from each other. So of course you're very encouraged to participate, but also we are very relevant tonight. So please raise your hand, and for free video speech, refrain from interrupting, so that our speakers and everybody's ideas can be developed until the end. So, to give you a bit of context, let me tell you about our two guests. So, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Jun Yoon tonight at the embassy for the first time in our salon. He's the president of Palo Alto Investors, a hedge fund created in 1989, who has 2 billion in assets. He certified in cardiology. Dr. Yoon served at Stanford at the clinical faculty from 2000 to 2006. He has served on numerous boards and is currently a trustee of the Salk Institute, which focuses on making groundbreaking contributions to understanding of cancer, aging, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and infectious diseases. Dr. Yoon donated the 1 million Palo Alto Longevity Prize in 2013 to nurture innovations in longevity, and recently donated 2 million to launch the National Academy of Medicine Aging and Longevity Grand Challenge. But above all, Dr. Yoon has been to Burning Man for the past 18 years. Let's be honest, that's really impressive. Alison here, Alison Drakeman, conducts research and coordinates the technical programs at Foresight Institute. Her focus is on the reduction of existential risks, especially from AI taking over the world. So, thank you, Alison. Alison, actually, if you remember, I know some of you were here, Alison led a salon on existential hope a while ago. I mean, not so long ago. And during this salon, to give you an update for those who weren't here, we worked all together to create an index of readings, podcast organizations, and people that inspire an optimistic long-term vision for humanity. It's still completely a thing, right? It's still completely a thing. This index is
it's on
still
existentialhope.com.
completely participative, exactly. So if you'd like to help Alison, if you'd like to help humanity, and if you'd like to save the world, go on existentialhope.com, read, contribute.
And if you don't, just leave.
Yeah, if you don't, raise your hand for the apology.
If you don't, do not be surprised if one day you try to turn your computer off and it just tries to throw you into a space vacuum.
Okay. No, we did.
Yeah. On the lighter tone. Yes, so Alison speaks and moderates panels on existential risks and AI safety. On existential hope too, because let's be positive. Longevity, blockchains, ethics in technology. She holds a summa cum laude Master of Science in Philosophy and Public Policy from the London School of Economics. And her thesis focused on creating a moral framework for artificial general intelligence via natural language processing. So, dear humans, please help me welcome Dr. Jun Yoon and Alison Dukeman for our talk tonight.
Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We're quite a large crowd today, so if ever you want to use the bathroom, just feel free to go. We're not going to have a break. Just feel free to get up and stand up and do whatever you have to do. A couple of words maybe before we start on Foresight. So Foresight Institute is the nonprofit that I work for, and it's an organization that steers technologies of fundamental importance for the human future towards positive futures. We focus on nanotechnology, cybersecurity, and AI. And we divide our efforts into three big categories. One is we advance beneficial technologies, and for that we currently have a fellowship opening, we have a Feynman Prize opening, and we have workshop applications open. I'll post all of these on the website of the event on the Facebook website, so please apply by all means. Then we also focus on preventing the risks associated with technologies. For that we have an event coming up. I just confirmed that today in 7th of April at the Internet Archive. It's going to be open to the public. It's on AI safety. I'll post more on that as well as things become more clear. And then we encourage discussions like these tonight that will help us kind of inform which technologies to advance and which risks to tackle. So thank you all for coming. And I've been recently become pretty interested in kind of evolutionary analysis of problem areas we investigate at Foresight. And I know that these evolutionary analyses have their issues, right? There's some like hindsight bias, so I'm aware of that. But I still think that there's some value in examining our evolutionary past in many domains, right? And I think often a look into our past kind of gives a good idea of how we could pave our way forward. So we've launched a series of salons this year, and they take a certain problem domain and then try to disentangle it using this evolutionary lens. At Freezing Woman 2 weeks ago, we shine light on rationality from an evolutionary angle and saw kind of what evolutionary biases we're prone to rationally and how we can overcome them. Then later in March, we're going to have a salon on an evolutionary angle on society with Robin Hanson. I'm super excited that he confirmed. That was also on Friday. And then later this year, we're going to have one on human biology with IndieBio, probably. That was also confirmed today. So there's a lot of interesting, I think, evolutionary angles to be had on many different topics. So why do we focus on culture and especially counterculture today? Well, I think it's a topic that is incredibly urgent right now because with the current political polarization, with mimetic warfare, with media and social media, clickbait maximizing and all of that echo chambering going on, I think it's useful to find some common denominators. And I think many of the current problems, they could be helped really by doing an examination of the underlying culture that perpetuates the problem. And I think that Robert Anton Wilson was right when he said that our culture is like a commonly agreed map that we lay on the world to help us navigate in it. But it kind of has become so ubiquitous, and we've navigated in it for so long that we tended to forget that it's a map, right? And that's fine, but as long as that map serves well to navigate the territory. But the territory via technological change has changed so much that the map doesn't really seem to fit quite right, and we haven't really updated our culture much to take that into account. And it doesn't really seem like we navigate well with this map. So I would say let's examine this culture map, its history and where it needs updating. Let's do like an evolutionary genealogy of the state of culture and see what we can change. And I'm hoping that June can give you a brief overview of some of the tools with which to tackle some phenomena now. They can be like more broader focus, but he also has some really good personal advice what we can do right now. So I would like to do that in the first part of the salon. And we'll touch on some examples, but quite high level. And then afterwards, I'd like to open up the floor to discussions. And then here, I would really like to focus on specific topic areas. So for example, the Bitcoin frenzy, right? The cryptocurrency rush, AI safety, and so on. So first, let's lay the playing field. He will talk about some tools that are kind of like more broader applicable, and then we deep dive into some examples. So June, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You really have this unique ability to kind of unpack and uncover these unconventional truths and use them to really create effective change. I think one of the unconventional truths which we both share is this passion for longevity as a kind of blind spot in our attention. You were on Foresight's panel on longevity 2 years ago. Since then you were at Vision Weekend to unpack some other unconventions on long-term thinking. And now you're here. And I don't only value you being here because of that evolutionary angle, but also because you recently, or last year, organized a celebration of counterculture for the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. And John Perry Barlow was present there, and it really opened my eyes to like the force that counterculture can have if it's done right. And John Perry Barlow's death last week is really, I think, an incredible loss on so many domains, but it's also a call to action. He really was a person who dedicated his whole life to realizing many of the ideas that resonate with the term counterculture. And now over this weekend, I re-examined a lot of his work, and it really brought home to me this point that this is really important to get right. And I really would like to invite the salon tonight to not be like armchair philosophy, but to really try to drive home some points that we can change right now, because the time is ripe, really. And if there's any one thing that all of us can have an effect on, it's our culture. So I would love this to be action-focused and not only be philosophy. And well, if we start off with maybe like one of my favorite works by John Perry Barlow was always the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. I think you shared last week the 12 principles of adult behavior that he's also authored. So I'd love to start with, perhaps you could kind of start by what kind of Barlow's life work meant for you in terms of counterculture and why you think we need counterculture right now.
Yes, so John Perry Barlow was one of the great beacons of modern times, and his life and work spanned the last half century. And the reason he was so enduring a figure, both through the cultural arts and then eventually as a internet defender of freedom in the internet, was because he was focused on truth. And I think that's the broader point here is culture gets it right most of the time. So this isn't about necessarily pursuing counterculture for the sake of it. The goal is to really pursue truth. And so when you think about it from the perspective of the 99%, 1% argument that I make, we like getting involved as a family on things that are skewed 1 and 99. We don't get involved in things that are divided 50-50 because I love the fact that there are lots of people involved in 50-50 arguments. It tends to be very contentious.
What's an example of a good 50-50?
Red and blue, that's 50-50. Global warming, not global warming, GMO, non-GMO. We don't get involved in those things because we're quite delighted that there's so many different points of views. We're more worried about things that are skewed 1 and 99, where there's a single point of view that dominates. And most of the time, the single point of view is correct, but there'll be situations where the really minority view is the correct one. And that's worth investing in. That's worth getting involved in. And that's where we want to do counterculture. So where the mainstream culture has actually we think has got it wrong. So longevity is a classic example. Mm-hmm. The conventional wisdom, the 99% view 6 years ago when we started was aging shouldn't be solved and can't be solved. So we looked at the alternative view. It's an area that I've been pursuing since the early 90s, but what's the best way to get involved? Because I think the 1% view that's been out there is the correct one. And then using methodologies and tools to expand that culture so that there's at least 2 points of views. I prefer everything to have at least 2 points of views. Mm-hmm. I wrote an essay on mimetic parallax, which is the idea that the first thing that'll happen after world peace is civil war. And that's because we're evolutionarily wired, speaking of evolutionary perspective, which is a great perspective to think about all these things, we're wired to look for differences in each other and in ourselves. So as long as there's an external enemy, a groupthink will take over. We'll drive towards consensus. The minute there's no longer an external enemy, we'll quickly divide into two, because from a group selection perspective, evolution doesn't want us to get into consensus. That's when things slow down and we stop evolving. It's when we have at least 2 points of views that mimetic evolution happens. So this is the reason why we divide into male and female, so that we get two slightly different points of views on everything. And that's a good thing.
What a
Right.
feature, yeah.
That's a feature.
What a feature.
So mimetic parallax is a feature. Parallax means in radiology, I was a radiologist, not a cardiologist, but when you have two points of views on something, you can actually see better than a single point of view. So oracles are very dangerous to society. What you want is a dual point of view. And that dual point of view is so successful from a meta perspective, it's everywhere. Every system has this polarity to it. So it feels awful to be in the middle of all this debate, but just know that that's actually a good thing. It's not a bug. Now we can turn it into a bug by doing ridiculous things out of it, but be okay with the fact that it's okay to disagree. It's when we don't have agreement, it's when we have consensus, when we don't have disagreement, that I worry more. That's counterculture.
All right. And do you think this general mimetic parallax will, it's almost like, it seems to me like almost like a Hegelian dialectic, right? Do you think that will ever come to an end? Do you think there will ever be like a final consensus, or is it more like, the minute that we achieve kind of consensus on one issue, that there's immediately the split off again, because that is what drives progress ultimately? Or do you think there's some kind of utopian ideal where we will actually agree? Because it does seem like that there are some universal discoveries that we make in terms
so
of
this
human rights.
constant migration from one end to another, which mapped over time creates oscillations, is the state of being. So, socialism and capitalism, they both have their merits, but neither one of them are complete models for successful society. So what we end up doing is we oscillate over time, because we always get overextended and the counterculture kicks in and we go the other way. So as it relates to mimetic parallax too, what's good for the system, you think about interstrata competition too. What's good for the system may not be good for the individual. There's competition and oscillations between strata. So we're always in motion, and that essentially is the fractal of the energy of life. This is how we move forward, this is how we evolve. Yeah, and so I don't mind it. I don't think the goal is to arrive at a utopia. I think the goal is to continue to move beyond utopia, whatever that means to anybody.
So utopia is the ever-evolving path almost.
Exactly, it's the state, it's the dynamism.
Okay, and so you mentioned longevity as one of the kind of things where you thought it was sufficiently kind of 99-1 that it was worth getting involved. What are other current things?
Well, you can think about the 1% and the opportunities of counterculture. You can think about almost everything that you're doing and think about the opposite to see if that's actually the correct way to do it. So just try it out. So if you feel like you're too busy, anybody here feel like they're too busy? Right now, again, this is evolutionary programming. We're wired for scarcity, where there's calories or opportunities, and we're now living in abundance. We have connectivity to so many venues of calories and information and opportunities. So we never set upper bounds from an evolution perspective, so we tend to overconsume. So we don't do enough portfolio management. We just say yes to sugar, fat, and opportunity, and events. So the next thing you know, you're just overscheduled. This is everybody.
I mean, look at the crowd here.
Right? So that's opportunity obesity, just like caloric obesity. They have the same underlying Occam's razor cause, because we don't know how to prioritize and we were wired for scarcity. So in January, I ran an opportunity cleanse for people. Opportunity cleanse means literally dropping everything. Do an elimination diet of all your opportunities.
You're allowed to sleep though.
Build from the basics. What do you foundationally need? Sleep, calling mom, right? These are things that'll never happen if you lived according to your opportunities. You gotta eliminate everything and just build out your life. So living an unscheduled life is counterculture. So I have a 1 meeting a day limit. This is it. But the rest of the day is full because I use my Outlook as my diary, not as my calendar. So I enter into each day. I mean, we're living in a time of just incredible change. And when I encounter something, I might have 8 days that I can spend on it. Whereas most people, even if they encounter something interesting, they're in gridlock for the next 2 weeks.
What was the most recent thing where you took 8 days out of your
so,
one meeting a day calendar
yeah,
to
so,
pursue something?
we hosted
hardcore?
this food gathering. I brought in all my favorite food scientists from around the country. And I'd done site visits, and I know their points of views, and I know their views don't agree with each other. So put them all on stage and had them disagree publicly, which is a great way for the public to see, oh, sugar, not sugar, fat, no fat, all that stuff. There's no consensus. So they all agreed on stage that they agree on nothing, which is very interesting. That's foundational,
Which is a good thing, right?
It's a good thing, exactly.
But
So the other thing they agreed on was there's not enough funding, which was technically true.
that's usually the one thing that most.
They want more money, yes. Yeah, I agree on that. So there's, but to be more nuanced about it, there's no, in other words, these scientists, when you ask them where they get their funding, it turns out if you just think about it, there's no NIH for food research. NIH is about health, and they can cobble together a little bit of money from the NIH, CDC, and USDA, along some related RFPs. But by and large, they have to go to industrial source of funding. So there's $12 billion of industrial funding in food science. So where you end up with is a situation where almost all the studies you've read about are essentially marketing studies. 93% of scientific studies funded by a sponsor conclude in favor of the sponsor. And that's natural, right? That's what you'd expect. So while it's been great that industry has filled this funding gap for scientists, we can't rely on private source of funding to do our public science indefinitely. I mean, that doesn't work, right? So I thought about this, and over a course of 8 days, I wrote a couple of white papers about the solution, right? So what do we need to do? How do we solve this problem? I was intending to fund food research directly, but now I'm facing $12 billion of industrial funding. So I'm like, that's not an efficient use of capital. So I looked at history of how we got here, which is, I think, always a good place to start, is how do we get here? So the main thing that's changed about food, which is the main thing that's changed about everything, is that we've evolved from, and we've changed from a tribally connected culture, living among kin of 100, to living among strangers due to dropping costs of energy, technology, and communication.
And that was what, like the territory has flipped and has changed, right? But the map hasn't really updated here.
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly. So the source of food 150 years ago was your mom, and she would never put in food coloring or antibiotics because it was all about you. So the main thing that's changed is the source of food from your mom to a company. The company cares about you, number two, cares about itself, number one, and it's very disadvantageous being in the second place position, because they're going to now mine all your neurobiology and hack that for their own benefit. So they'll put in sugar and food coloring, all that stuff, right? That's the only thing that's changed. Now, when Lincoln wrote the USDA in the law, put the Department of Agriculture in the law in 1860, we were agrarian. We were growing our own food. We were the growers and the consumers. So the fact that the USDA's charter and the mission statement says protect the interests of farmers and nourish the public, there was no conflict of interest. It was the same group, right, that we were feeding ourselves. You fast forward 150 years, now we've industrialized, and 2% of the people are agrarian and 100% consume. So now it's counterparty risk. We've gone from a model of alignment to a model of counterparty, but we've not updated our institutions to reflect that. So now the fact that the USDA has a double duty to farmers and to nutrition is the reason we ended up in this position. So now the last time we wrote the nutritional guidelines, it was written by the ag industry.
Yeah.
Right.
And you say it's similar thing about the counterparty risk is not only the kind of the source of like these kind of fake food movement, but the same for fake news, right?
Fake news and fake news have the same origins. Fake politicians, fake celebrities, they all have the same source, which is we used to live in highly aligned kin tribes, according to Hamilton's rule, and we've dissociated from that kind of society, but we still have this deep expectations of Hamilton's rule, And so we end up consistently underestimating counterparty risk. And this is the foundation of everything. Okay, let's talk about food first of all, to get to solutions. So my project on food, the white paper, I wrote a bill, and the bill is a draft bill which we presented to a congressional caucus, asking Congress to move nutrition from the Department of Agriculture and move it under the Department of Health and Human Services so that they can each have single duties. Department of Ag can continue to serve the interests of farmers, and the National Institute of Nutrition, which is what we're going to found, can serve the interests of public health only.
And that's, I think, part of kind of like that overall concept that you've mentioned in a talk recently that I watched of like alignment, right? If we're not genetically aligned anymore, sort of like, you know, like your mom has a real kind of like incentive to treat you well and to nurture you well because of that genetic alignment, but because we don't really have that anymore because of that evolution dislocation, we now kind of like need to find other ways of how to align incentives again so that counterparty risk doesn't arise in that way.
So the bill writing was the 8 days. I could do that because I had time, empty schedule. And we've gotten all the top food scientists in the country to co-sign it, and it's going to be presented. The bill's already written, and we're going to reverse engineer the year by convening events so that people truly buy in, and it's understood by Congress that this is authentic. So the work's already done, and we're just going to have to finish it out this year.
And you published the paper when?
Over the Christmas break. January 1st,
nice.
I wrote it.
Okay.
We held the event in November, and we're already in action mode. We're already in completion mode.
Good time for good resolutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So the what we're after here, this is just one example, longevity food, is figuring out the truth, and if it's the minority truth, then finding tools to convert into action. As it relates to culture, so many of the things are essentially agency violations, whether it's food or fake news. In the olden days, when your tribal leader was telling you something, they might not have known much, but it was always in your best interest. So there was a high fidelity in terms of interest and high alignment. Today, when Shaquille O'Neal tells you to drink Sprite, he doesn't care about you. He cares about himself. And you're just the vehicle by which he's going to serve himself. So it's self-dealing. But our minds can't understand this transition that's happened to all of us. It's not your mom telling us anymore.
A simple question would be, how would you make a distinction between high and low trust societies? Because there does seem to be variation in global societies with regard to whether there's high assumptions of trust or low assumptions of trust. So it doesn't seem to be quite as simple as just like, which I do agree that, a tribal society, the very small things where people are very genetically close, tends to be relatively high trust. So how do cultural institutions mediate this?
Yeah, so this is about institutions. It's really about updating the institutions to reflect the total value and restore alignment and come up with vessels of alignment if they're available. So that's the new social contract that we're going to promote through counterculture. And the tools we're using are all subversive campaigns. So that'll kind of give you a sense of what we're going to talk about tonight. And if you guys are interested, I'm going to host an entire event on this on March 10th in San Francisco. We'll bring in outside speakers on how to work on counterculture through subversive programming.
So after you've done your events cleanse, maybe that's the only one that gets honored again.
And we have a community that we're starting around this in Facebook. So there's a range, right? And every society is different. The main thing is to just acknowledge that Hamilton's rule basically is people display altruism in proportion to their degree of kinship, and that made sense when we lived in highly aligned tribes, but now we live among strangers with quote low alignment genetically anyway. People tend to self-deal. So if you look at Silicon Valley today, there's some patterns that are pervasive. One is everybody spends way too much time on their kids and not enough time in the community. Now this feels like a dysfunction, except you have to first realize from an evolution perspective, they're just following Hamilton's rule. Like, forgive them. They have no connection to the rest of us. They know for sure they're related to their kids. That's why they put everything to their kids. They show up
And
to
this-
every kid's event, every soccer game, and they completely forget to be good citizens. That's completely normal.
This is because they don't live in genetically aligned tribes
That's
anymore.
exactly right. So because we lowered the cost of technology and communication energy so low, we become mobile. So we've increased social liquidity, so we're now connected to many people. So, and this gets at the heart of everything. I mean, when you lived in, yes,
Is this fundamentally a problem of trade fraud? Because if you have people that are perhaps on the line where they can both verify with great accuracy what it is they're trading, hypothetically they could, trade valuable resources, even if they're fundamentally.
trade or trade for?
I said trade fraud, where if you have trade without fraud, you could have people that
Yeah.
have, ultimately different goals, but some instrumentally convergent.
Yeah,
trades
so-
that are viable.
Well, so that's there's two main forms of altruism. There's the reciprocal altruism, which is a trade, and kin altruism. So the way humans operate in terms of service and a gift mindset is there's unconditional gifts and altruism given to those that are related to you. And independent of that, and sometimes on top of that, there's a reciprocal altruism where you literally are measuring the trustworthiness of the transaction partner. So that's the transactional component of
It's like
altruism.
tit for tat, or
Tit for tat, quid pro quo. Those are two primary forms of altruism that have been selected through evolution. So we're operating much more in a reciprocal altruism environment where there's a lot of quid pro quo, but the issue is we're wired to want and expect kin altruism. We're wired to expect more from our community than what we're getting. So the alienation that we feel is real because we're not in that tribe where it's very clear people are not after your interests unconditionally on a day-by-day basis. It's much more transactional. Yes?
When you're being the father of 3 kids who I coach through various sports, when you're doting on your kids out in every basketball game, and half of what you're doing when you're doting on your kids is building community and a trust culture with the other people who are on the team or watching the game or what have you. So isn't that also?
That's also true. That people are organizing around these teams.
and that's almost more like a collateral effect of it.
Well, and so, I mean, you look at the totality. On average, community behavior has eroded significantly. So it's definitely, it still comes out as a me-first culture. People will wave with 5 fingers at soccer games and at schools and at neighborhood. And the minute they get on one-on-one, they wave with 1 finger. So, and that's what we truly feel. That's what we're modeling for our kids is the 1-finger salute on Highway 101. So we're very isolated in terms of our commitment, right? Family and maybe their sports teams, but we diss them as we drive by them in our own neighborhoods otherwise, right? So this is not how we were. It's different, and because we're wired to expect differently, that's why we feel. I mean, this alienation, the drift towards alienation, has been going on for decades. As soon as transportations fell, and we're not living in our tribes.
So we said like one way to kind of like realign is by creating like incentive structures where people do think that they're aligned around certain other areas, which is like the one that you mentioned in terms of nutrition. But since we talk about counterculture, if you said that a way to really build better culture out is to build a better shared consciousness, and the way to do that would be by kind of building a better shared language. And we've tossed around a couple of like different words, really, that if it's only language that we could like rephrase in a way that it would show more that kind of focus from us to the community again, that would already be quite an achievement. So what is the actual problem with current language, and what are better words? Which words need renaming here?
The linguistic relativity theory is that until we name things, it's hard to have consciousness around concepts. So the idea that Homer described 3 colors in the rainbow because there were only 3 named colors back then, and therefore he only saw 3 colors, whereas we all know there's 7. No, of course there's not 7. There's infinite, right? Because we've only named 7, we only see 7. But the minute you name them, you see more and more colors. So when you think about culture as collective consciousness and consciousness as an emergent property of language, the language is a great way to create culture or counterculture. Yes.
Curious whether you're talking about the hard version or the soft version of linguistic relativity, where the hard version would be that you have like
The soft
perceptual
version.
penetration.
Yeah, and I can see your purple outfit. That's awesome.
Perceptual penetration.
Back then didn't have the yeah, exactly. So there are many things that have yet to be named. In other words, I mean, these are early days of human consciousness and human evolution relative to the near future, right? I mean, this is the oldest we've ever been as a species, but relative to where we're going, I think there's so much more potential. So if you look at the 20th century and you look at what we achieved, we got a lot done. I mean, we got out of savagery. We went through some
Check that box.
scientific industrial revolutions, and we were able to finally contemplate ourselves. So 20th century, about the best we could do is to navel gaze. But I think the 21st century we can do so much more. I think 21st century psychology is going to be much more inclusive of other people. So in the 20th century, we start off with Freud and understand the ego. And then by mid-century, Maslow gave us the hierarchy of needs, which is going from very base levels to the highest need being self-actualization, which is all fine. I think we made a lot of progress, but I think the future of psychology 2.0, is going to be include much more the second person and the third person perspective. Let me give an example. So guess how old do you think the word empathy is in the English language? Roughly.
200 years.
Okay, 100 years. So your first thought is, what the hell were we doing before then, right? I mean, did we have any empathy at all? We finally had an opportunity to rethink the experience of others from our perspective. And yet, when you think about empathy, it's a highly first-person experience. We're trying to experience the life of others and trying to be in their shoes. But in fact, there is a second person in that equation. That person is, there's a feeling of wanting to be empathized upon. So just like storytelling and story listening co-evolved, empathy and the desire for empathy co-evolved as well. But we've never named that second person
So
experience.
even like empathy is like highly narcissist in its
Empathy
in its own terms.
is ironically actually reflects the lack of empathy for the fact that there's a second person in that experience. So if you think about all these phrases like, I want to be empathized upon, I want to be understood, I want to be validated, I want to be curious upon, I want to be empathized upon. They're all phrases awaiting linkage with neologisms. Until we name it, we don't even understand this concept.
I think some others that you said were self-advocacy, being highly like I-focused, then...
Sure. So where we ended up with in the 20th century is the real opportunity is to start looking two-dimensional in the second person and third person in terms of psychology. Where we've gone is the opposite. We've actually taken second person and third person concepts and we've made it a first person experience. So advocacy used to mean, there used to be another person involved in advocacy. Advocacy is about others. And now schools teach self-advocacy. So in the 1820s, like the word help used to mean help, right? Others, there's a second person. In 1820, the self-help movement started. Reliance used to be about relying on somebody else. And then Ralph Waldo Emerson started the self-reliance movement. So now we live in a culture of, self-service, self-guided tours where we take selfies. We've completely lost this opportunity to involve others in our experience. So all this is upside. I mean, the good news is this is all yet to happen. We're gonna invent these words. We're gonna become more conscious. And as we get conscious together, we're going to build out the culture.
So what are some words? What are some
You
novel
can just make
words
them
that
up.
we need?
Oh, what are
I
the
mean,
names?
you named one that was like sonhood and daughterhood.
Oh, sure.
Where like the kind of like
Sure.
evolutionary dysfunction was like we didn't even live long enough to develop something like sonhood, right?
Yeah. What Allison's referring to was mortality rates to be so high through infancy and childhood. Half your siblings were going to be dead. chances are one or both of your parents are dead by the time you hit puberty, and then half your children are gonna die. Those are all normal. This is why every fairy tale is Grimm, right? Written by the Grimm brothers, because it's all about death. And they got to teach about death. Every Disney movie starts with death of a parent, because that was how they taught the fact that mortality rates are very high. Now, thanks to the longevity movement, mortality rates are very low. Probability is very high that you're going to survive the adulthood. Probability is very high one or both of your parents are still alive while you're in adulthood. So this is a completely positive evolutionary dislocation. We were, from a cultural perspective as well, we were not wired to live long enough to be adult children of our own parents. So the antonym of fatherhood and sonhood is not childhood, because the antonym of childhood is adulthood. The antonym of fatherhood and motherhood is sonhood and daughterhood. And we've forgotten to use those words. So imagine injecting those words into American culture. And once the words are there, it'll help us have better relationships with people that are still around. Like, imagine what's possible. And there's no sonhood magazine, there's parenting magazine. But if you start thinking about this, oh my God, they're still here. You can have amazing relationships with these people.
Yeah, I did recently kind of Wait But Why kind of like prompts you to calculate the number of days that you still spent with your parents. For my dad, it was 30 weeks. If I see him a week per year, he's 60 now. These calculations can be quite sobering, but I think they do bring a point home that there is not that much time left, and we need to rethink that. And if we take these words, which are like really like, I don't know, nice prompts, I think, to think in that way. But you've also mentioned that kind of like mechanism of subversive media, right, in general, as a more general tool. So could you say a few things of how, you know, we might use that to create efficient counterculture for a better social contract?
Yes. So subversive programming has been used by bad people, again, people that are not aligned with you, for self-serving needs. So everything they've done, we can learn from, and now use it for the public benefit. The whole idea here is it's not me, it's you. So this is the play on the old phrase, it's not you, it's me. Just reverse it. It's not me, it's you. Who's it about? So you can use subversive programming to benefit the public. This was my dad's work. This is how we landed in the United States. Was my dad was putting public education into pop songs and pop TV shows and movies, completely embedded under CDA. And he got recognized by some American leaders and got a scholarship from the United States. And like most immigrants looked around thinking, this place is amazing. And then he went back to Korea. And when he got a call later from the World Bank to do what he was doing around the world, he jumped at the chance and he landed in Washington, D.C. So I was a World Bank brat in Washington, D.C. And he worked with presidents and prime ministers and top pop stars around the world to essentially embed education. He was competing with Coca-Cola for product placement, except he was placing social goods and pop culture. So what I learned from him, and also my son, who's a musician, is the effectiveness of pop entertainment at changing culture. For instance, we're wired for stories. Stories are a great way to bypass all the blocks we have. Remember, we have an incredible number of blocks, right? All the biases we have that you read about that get in the way of true listening. Listening is very hard. Listening to each other is very hard. And how do you tell stories in the world that cannot hear you is a very different paradigm than storytelling. So we can try to persuade others about a point of view, but as you've seen in social media, it doesn't work, right? Not only does it not work, they resent you. It makes them angry, and they're going to cherry pick everything you've said to get more angry at you. Has anybody observed this in social media? That's all there is these days, right? So how do you bypass all that, bless you? How do you bypass all the blocks that people have? So subversive programming. So music is wonderful as a way to get past people's blocks. When I think about John Perry Barlow, you know how like when you listen to one of your favorite songs, within 15 seconds you're in a different state of mind? Being with John Perry Barlow was like that. Within a sentence, he could change your frame of mind. He just had that poetic way with words. So imagine what's possible through music. So there was a great study that was done at Stanford that showed that music activates the same part of the brain. I'm stealing my son's talk here. He gave a talk on this in Hollywood. He's the musician in the family. Music activates the same part of the brain that your mother's voice does. Again, let's think about the evolutionary perspective. When you land on this planet, you're hearing all these memes. You don't know who's aligned with you, who's a counterparty. So whatever information is packaged in your mom's voice, okay, that's aligned with me, I'm gonna listen. We trust that, right?
Uh-huh.
Music has the ability to mimic exactly that. So think about less about memes, think about delivery vehicle. So what you wanna do is you wanna package the meme and place it in the correct part of the brain. Unless you do that, you're actually using communication irresponsibly. You're sending in the part of the brain that's gonna reflect anger and dissension. Put in the correct part of the brain.
What is a good song that does that really well?
Turns out every song precedes language. Long before there was language, there was song. This is how we conveyed.
So the content doesn't matter at all? Or?
So music is the vessel that places it. The content is what you put in that. So music is a delivery vehicle, and you can put whatever meme you want.
So what's a good song that plays a good
Well, I can tell you all the
message in a
bad
good
songs are
package?
all like, with 1914, beginning of the year, everybody said there's no, we're too prosperous, we were too fat and lazy, we haven't had a global war in 100 years, this will never happen, we understand ourselves, we have Freud, we have Darwin, we have all this social sciences, we'll never go to war. By the summer, everybody's singing songs, we'll be home by Christmas, and we went and created the greatest war. So it's been used by the bad people to brainwash people forever. In fact, this is the reason why every famous popular religion has hymns built into their culture. It's an incredible way to brainwash people. Okay. So it's been used by institutions all the time. So now imagine using that delivery vehicle for delivering sonhood and daughterhood for their benefit, to create the counterculture. So this is a campaign we've been on. We've already been in this 3 years. It's subversive, so we can't talk about it.
Sure.
But we're embedding content in the pop culture through these delivery vehicles.
All right. And we've talked a little bit about like some more personal and actionable items, and in order to give some time for discussion after this as well, because we're hitting almost the mark here, what are some of the kind of actionable items that we could all work on and focus on individually? I think one that really struck me, which we talked about a little bit, was this kind of evolutionary dislocation of like the plasticity of the brain, or as a problem that we don't learn enough anymore, we're not child enough anymore, and so we lose this plasticity to kind of be more creative problem solvers and be more seers. That was one where I think you had some really good advice of how we might get some of that plasticity back in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could share some of those items which we could act on right now.
Okay, so these are, I'll mention that one. This is on how to be a camera. So our minds are, act as cameras for 12 years. We're very open. We can see, we can hear, we can sense. And at 12, it literally switches. But because your consciousness used to come from the outside, but now after 12, it comes from your memory banks. But you can't feel that change. So you lose the ability to sense almost everything after age 12. This is the reason why you can't learn languages, learn how to skate. And I show these slides at my talks where literally you'll show people a slide and they can't see it, whereas kids can see it. Things that are, if you have like these groove patterns, your mind really shuts down. Anyway, this is a feature, not a bug, once again. The feature here is that you're born with the template to live about 22 years, and spending 12 years being a camera and 12 years being a projector was pretty rational, right? You land on this planet, you could have landed in any century, any country, and you just opened to the world. It's like landing on Blue Lagoon, as Christopher Atkins and Brooke Shields. And you don't know what the rules of engagement are, you just follow your instincts, you look around, you absorb, and then you mate, and then you have kids, and you pass on all the memes you know, you nurture, and you die. That's the short history of life. Two things have changed in the modern world. We're not dying at 12, we're living to 100. Wouldn't it be nice if we could be a camera for at least 50 years instead of being camera for 12 and being a projector for 88. And the second thing is the world's changing. So whatever the world you deconstructed in the olden days, you could reliably execute on your adulthood. Nothing ever changed. But in the modern world, things are changing so fast. Whatever world you deconstructed lives in a bubble of a time capsule for the rest of your life. And you're now identified as that generation with all your preferences, allegiances, the know-hows. And we end up with generation gaps. This has never happened in world history. So these are Darwinian dysfunctions. The lost plasticity at age 12, the lost camera. So in fact, the inability to see that as an opportunity is an example of lost camera. It's so obvious that this is the most
So it's like a
leverageable
meta
point of
lost
change.
camera
Yeah.
that you
There's
can't
no,
see
there's
that
no
we
clinical
lost the
trial
camera.
going on to help people regain the camera after 12. So whereas, if we could see, the first thing kids would call out is, oh, why shouldn't I develop a drug to learn how to speak French? But we're just all now boxed in the preconceived notions of our first 12
So
years.
what are some ways
solutions.
of gaining the camera?
Solutions. So
Solutions, please.
I have a book called Hiding in Plain Sight. You'll never find it. But in it are the prescriptions. So the first thing is to change your environment or change yourself. So if you change the context, everything will pop out. So the reason I love Burning Man is you go there and nothing makes sense. So everything pops out. You can see everything. And then when you come back, and then you get used to that and you come back, nothing here makes sense. So, everything pops out. Time also slows. When everything's popping out, a day at Burning Man will feel like, a week in your life, maybe
Increase
more.
your subjective time. Do
Increase
more
every
new
time,
things.
exactly. So there's a benefit to that. The second thing you can do is do improv. Has anybody here done improv? Okay, a lot of you, yeah. So improv helps us acknowledge that we're almost never listening to each other. Because we assume we're listening to each other. I mean, nobody ever walks around thinking, I'm not listening to you. We think we're listening. But when you do improv, it'll quickly expose the fact that we're not listening at all. 99% of the sweat of improv is actually trying to listen to another person. Remember, in improv, you build stories together. So if you're not listening, the story dies on you. So improv was a great way to train the camera in your mind. And the third great way is to be around seers. So be around children. All the people that still have their cameras open, they will absolutely amaze you, right? So when you're around them, you're like, oh my God, I don't know. I don't know yet. I'm 33, I don't know, right? Whereas your biologist told you don't know. These are all, I think, things that you can do to be, you're more honest. But as it relates to, that's not directly involved in the principles of counterculture. If I'm going to leave one advice on principles of building a better counterculture, building a better culture, it's a change of direction. So I'm going to steal from my son again, who gave a talk on this last year.
Okay, he's a seer.
He's a musician. He's young, that's true. I mean, he's the one who he has a patent on the fact that food allergy victims are rescued by epinephrine. And here we are thinking that food allergy is an immune disease, but the only drug that treats you is a neurohormone. So he asked a very, very basic question. Is it epinephrine insufficiency that kills people with food allergies, not immune dysfunction? There's totally counterculture. It was a 1% idea. We funded research at Stanford to study this, and we tested a bunch of kids with food allergies in terms of their epinephrine function, and guess what? They can't do it, right? So kids can see this. I mean, he had no medical education. He's just, all kids that can do this. So imagine giving every 9-year-old in this country a medical education. They'll probably solve everything. Longevity, that's the backup plan. Give medical education away to all the 9-year-olds, and they'll point out all the things that don't make any sense.
So there was this interesting, I think it was Socrates who said the youth should belong to the elderly because they appreciate youth much more. So you're arguing that, the actual, the elderly or the actual adulthood should belong to the youth.
Both ways. And it'd be nice if you had the optionality.
Let's switch it out once.
Okay, so here's the thing that's obvious. So he went to a school called Nueva, and they teach you this thing called social emotional learning. It's the use of I statements. So he did a reverse engineering of SEL, which is whenever you have conflict, you say your grievance in an I statement so that you don't accuse anybody of anything, right? That's the foundation of SEL. But he interpreted things, and he made up his own version of this, which is, he's part of a social activism band, but he uses it as a process. So whenever there's a world problem, he keeps rewriting the sentence until he can turn it into an I statement. So you might start with, there's an education problem in California. Okay, that's a they statement, right? So rewrite it, okay, and they just kept rewriting until he finally said, okay, I'm not doing enough to lobby the state to improve public education. So once you turn to an I statement, it gives you an action item. Remember, that's the thing that we really struggle with. And we're very good at listening to the TED Talks. We're very poor at executing. This is why commencement speeches work every year, because we're always inspired, and then we don't do anything, and we go back next year and we're inspired again. This is the state of the human condition. We're very idea focused and very little action. So.
And this is water, yeah.
And this is exactly. That's the David Foster Wallace.
Have you heard that one?
It's a great one, David Foster Wallace. I highly recommend it. So, converting to I statement, you get two things. You have your action item, because we're always asking, what do we do, right? And the second thing is, if you can't come up with an action item, you learn to let go. Whereas if it continually remains a third-person problem, all you do is you get angry, and nothing changes. Versus now you can actually do something, or you learn to let go. So it's a wonderful way to deal with the world's problems. So it's the foundation of activism. The second thing is, whenever something good happens, try to turn it into a you or they statement instead of an I statement. So instead of I scored the game-winning goal, you say your path led to the game-winning goal. Take the I out of it. So if you just did these two things as the kernel, it's not me, it's you, this is the foundation of counterculture. This is the thing that we're not good at right now.
All right. And if maybe as a closing thing, because ultimately counterculture, as you mentioned at the beginning, we're not doing this for the sake of counterculture, right? We're doing this for the sake of reaching the goal of actually updating our social contract. So if you could like predict kind of like what novel challenges there might be on the horizon, and then kind of like see how we have to update and what does the end, so, or like what would be the next update of the social contract? So where do we go with it, with this counterculture movement?
Yeah, there are three things that we're building out through the new social contract. So one is, wherever possible, create structures of alignment. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley, everybody's trying to figure out why is Silicon Valley so special. The thing we do really well, among many things, is we're very good at assigning equity in a way to incentivize people. So this, we've created, since then we're no longer under Hamilton's rule, we essentially created the concept of corporations as a way to align interests, as a way to work together. This is the new tribe, right? And in many other corporate cultures, including America, the alignment is so low, there's so little equity ownership, people just kind of self-deal. Whereas in the Valley, self-dealing actually improves the well-being of the company. So that's a very successful model of creating an alternative model. Since now we're in a displaced environment, we essentially have recreated Hamilton's rule around with the use of equity ownership. So now think about every agency violation that's out there, politics, education, every institution, and create an incentive structure of alignment. So create goal congruence, and then create an incentive structure so that you're actually all moving the ball forward together. So imagine an insurance company right now, I mean, they don't have to take care of your long-term health. They don't have to invest in preventative health because you're probably going to change jobs and you're going to change insurance, and or you're going to end up on Medicare. So that's a misaligned incentive, right? So they're not acting in your best interest. They're acting in their best interest, and you just happen to be in the way. A better model would be an insurance company that succeeds as a function of your long-term success. Right? Same thing with teachers. Imagine teachers whose success was a function of the kids' long-term success. So if you create these alignment structures, it's through policy and through innovation, we can create much better aligned structures that rationalizes all these interactions for everyone's benefit. The second dimension of a social contract is when we can't create goal congruence for whatever reason, just if you have a fiduciary obligation, live up to them. And then if people don't do it, hold them accountable, enforce. Right now, there's so many breaches of fiduciary obligations across the board. Politicians, right? I mean, they should be public service, but their language is all about getting votes. It's about them, right? Doctors are monetizing their patients too often. Even like boy-girl relationships. When you could pick from only a tribe of 100, you could pick from 1 or 3. You put everything into that relationship. There's no back end. There's no liquidity. But once you have liquidity to relationships, you can now choose from thousands. Just keep clicking left. So the relationship is much more extractive than service-minded. So if you look at Yahoo articles, they're constantly teaching you what you should expect out of your partner, not how to be a better partner. Again, just change the arrow. And this is all a function of the transaction volumes that have increased. Anyway.
All right, so that were 2, right? Or was it the third?
The third one is, first one is create structures of goal congruence. The second is live up to fiduciary obligations. Third is, let's say there's situations where you can't create goal congruence and you don't have a fiduciary obligation. In those cases, take responsibility, right? So put yourself in a position of responsibility of others. So, be as passionate about your responsibility to others as you're about your own rights. Right now, there's a lot of talk about rights, right? A lot of marches about rights. There's no marches for responsibility. So if we have just a balance, if we took more responsibility for each other, people wouldn't have to march for their rights because we were doing it for them, right? So all the selfishness is a result of our own selfishness. Because we're not advocating for each other, people have to advocate for themselves, right? So that's the third dimension of social contract. And this is all, this all needs updating because we're not living in a small tribe anymore where things
All
are
right,
rational.
and that's why we're here tonight. So thanks a lot for that great
Thank you.
intro.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we start first with questions and then leading into comments, yeah?
June, could you talk about what you're existentially hoping for and then the ethical axioms that act as inputs?
Also, if you have something directly to say to a point that we're making, I think the rulers point at that person. If you have a new point, then raise your hand. Okay.
Have you heard Allison's answer to this?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell your story
The
first.
existential hope?
Your existential hope.
Well, I mean, please all check out that index on existential hope. It is right now becoming more of a kind of collection of hopeful items. But I really sorry that I'm phasing this in, but I'm not an expert on any of these topics. There's a lot of technical stuff on biotech, on nanotech, on AI, where I'm currently filling out all of these different sub areas. I'm sure we can all collectively do a much better job at that. So please take that as a call to action and fill out some stuff so I don't have to do it. But
And then mine is my hope for the world. So the World Economic Forum's mission statement is improve the state of the world. For me, it's improving the resilience of the world. So build capacity so we can do more, both on the upside, but more resilient to the stresses as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, so something, listening to the whole talk, thank you, this is beautiful. I'm so glad to hear you in an extended form. Thanks, Allison. It's something that ties together counterculture and Burning Man and remaining a camera into adulthood instead of becoming just a projector. And it also ties together plasticity, and it's a 1% proposal, if you will, of fringe minority long-tail thing, although not in this community, but I mean, in this country, it certainly is. The thing that ties this all together is the 1% proposal, is psychedelics. And I'm wondering where you come down on that, and how you think it fits in.
With all these cameras.
How do you think it fits in? Like, it is
This is an embassy. This is a
So
sanctuary.
I'll say it on camera. I mean, I not only think they should be legal, I think they should be mandatory.
Okay.
So at the event a year ago that we hosted, Rick Doble, I brought him out, and he spoke on stage. I think this stuff has incredible medical potential. It'll start out with PTSD, and there's also sort of social structural reasons why we got delayed by 50 years, just like in the longevity movement. I've been approached by folks at MAPS and people in the community about how to organize a community like we did in longevity, where we were able to take a fringe idea and make it mainstream. Longevity is very safe now, right? You guys can all talk about it. It was not safe. You know, it was Aubrey de Grey, and that was about it, till 5 years ago. So they're interested in normalizing and growing the community around this. So I have offered my help. So I side on the 1% on this one. I think, to me, that seems like truth. And I think I think we're pretty close to hitting a point where I think we can actually do something great with it, and from a cultural perspective.
Thank you.
Yes.
Lost Tribe come up over and over again. It resonates with me. I wonder why when we see like large scale efforts taking on like widespread problems with education, like schools being built, people taking on big projects, uniform transportation, big nutrition efforts, longevity efforts. Why is that? Why is like thinking about being tribal again such a fringe thing? And it doesn't seem like anyone's taking that very seriously. Or am I missing that? So it's kind of open-ended question. Am I missing that? Do you see it as something important to explore? How would we start exploring? Obviously, there's some legal issues and all kinds of things. I feel like it's so fundamental. And you talk about how we all feel like a little lonely. We all know what that is. And it's like, why are we not taking that on seriously? And why are not like some of the power players that are trying to solve the world's problems not talking about that and funding big efforts?
Yeah, I think it's just time. I think 20th century we got about as far as we could. And 21st century, I think we're going to make it happen. I mean, I believe this thing about Hamilton's rule dislocation is truth, this dislocation of tribal structure. I think it's the Occam's razor to explain so many weird things that have been going on. And so we took that on 3 years ago as a family foundation mission, is to grow the awareness of this as the Occam's razor problem and the Occam's razor solution. We just happen to be doing it through subliminal programming because we know that people have such, develop such allergies to new ideas.
But even at like the higher levels where you have people just billionaires and so on who have like lots of capital, lots of power, networks, so on, why aren't there like, because like something like longevity can be 1%, it still is being funded in a big way to pursue longevity research and so on.
Yeah.
Why is that not happening?
Well, I think it's about this. This is actually my first public talk. I just published we were going to do all this subversively, but I published a paper on this today, on the new social contract.
Where can people find it?
Amazon. Yeah.
Cool.
So you guys are the first people to hear it, and we're going to do the whole
Your
conference.
answer is that
We're just starting. Yeah, we're at the infancy.
That
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Jizya?
That's cool.
It's all upside. No, I don't consider this. It's all upside because right now.
Exactly right.
That's the
Yeah.
exactly right one for all the upside.
Keep in
You're
mind the
an early adopter
culture
of
is
it.
great.
Cashes out.
We live in an amazing time, right? So I'm actually. This is about course correction, and we're doing most things right. But these are ways to get even better. I'm not a dystopian. I think even if we did nothing, I think we'll self-resolve some of these things. Just like longevity, I think is inevitable. We're going to solve it. But this is a way to just kind of accelerate the phenomenon.
It's really more important than longevity and all these other, and many of these other things. It baffles me that we're like all living this.
Let's go do it. Again, we're at the embassy. You guys are ambassadors. Go be ambassadors for all this. Yeah.
That, by the way, is the purpose at the embassy in ways. After we've gone from tribes to extended families to nuclear families to broken families, nobody at all is to reconstitute the tribe.
So there is a community event, like a conference on communities, I think on March 17. I live at Ubuntu over here, and I think Hate Commons is overarching like Mother Community, and they're doing a conference at the Red Vig on community building. So if you're interested in these tribal...
Yeah, I'm aware of all those. The real big question is why is there not more money being put into this and like kind of more power behind it? Not why is it so fringe? And any of these other things, education, longevity, transportation, so on, there's some vanity project, hyperloop or whatever. Why is that not happening for tribe?
And how can you turn that into an I statement?
Make it an I statement. What can I do to lobby the government?
People that could be doing those things. Why is it happening only in like the fringes? It's structured.
Well, come on March 10th. I mean, longevity went from, I was blown away. I thought it would take forever. But we've been in every major magazine in the last 5 years with no PR budget. I think, if you're on the right track, that's how you know. right? Or either that or everybody hates you, but we got no resistance on this one. I don't think we're going to get resistance on this one. I think it's so self-evident once you understand it. So for instance, here's the double whammy. So once you have this sort of Hamilton's rule problem, and you add free markets on top of it, it's just a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
So you can think about Kim Kardashian and high fructose corn syrup
I'm
and
excited.
fake news as all having the same underlying origin. Because if you take Hamilton's rule violations and race to the bottom, like clickbait, you cannot stop clickbait as they are, because if you try to censor Facebook, TMZ will rise, right? So everything's about just maximizing clickbait and fake news. You can't stop it because of the competitive nature of it. So free markets combined with this is the disaster.
Yeah, I understand that. That's again, that's answering the question at scale. And I'm really just pushing back on why is it in the smaller 1% forum of like money, power, big ideas.
People just aren't aware. Just like empathy until 1908,
Even just
we didn't name it.
even just the types of billionaires that are doing funding in schools.
I've never heard anybody else talk about this. That's why we're doing it. Yeah.
Well,
Just like
first we
longevity.
have to maybe create a brand.
Well, I was just going to riff off that or offer a little bit of an answer. I mean, I think a lot of the billionaires are focused on, they're very tech-y people.
Sure.
And they're very focused on things that they actually can solve. And the reason they latched on to something like longevity is actually now it's become a technological project. The problem with most of these other things, and the blind spot of a lot of people, and the bubble we sit in Silicon Valley, is this techno-utopianism.
It's very
There's a
quantitative,
massive techno-utopianism. Technology solves all problems. It's neutral. We put it out there. People use it, and society should maximize its benefit. That's for the society to figure out. We, as sort of tech geek engineers, scientists, don't like to think about sociological problems because we've spent our lives focused on problems that are more tractable. The sociological ones are ugly and complicated. What we're talking about here is social and cultural evolution, which is, for Mark Zuckerberg, a really difficult discussion because you can't engineer your way out of it nearly as methodically and precisely and predictably, right?
Yeah.
And this doesn't. So I would come to education as a lot of the solution there. I mean, like it's just, the Stanfords of this world should be focusing a lot about technology and society. There's a huge amount of history and a huge amount of literature and a huge amount of people that have been thinking about this stuff. This isn't new stuff. There's a lot of people who have been thinking about these things for a long time, but it hasn't been that the people in power have been thinking about it, as you've been saying. Actually, and they're called social scientists. They're massively underfunded. They're massively ignored by our society, and they think about these things all the time. They're just not part of the power elite that change things. I mean, these conversations are very common in more social science, liberal art universities, where this is like, the common discussion every evening. It's just that those people aren't running the world anymore.
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion the other day on that it seems to me like that intelligence and good ethics somehow correlate. So people with a high degree of intelligence somehow have good ethics, but intelligence and power doesn't always correlate. Rather, it's like almost like an adversarial relationship because people tend to be humble. So I think like these kind of like more, it's almost like a structural problem, right, with the social scientists. Yeah, one of those. Okay, anyone else? I saw them here.
Hi, I'm Kathleen tonight. It's my first time here. Thank you very much. I think what I got is I'm not mental health. I want to study addiction and PTSD. So from when you talk about psychology, about always self or self-help, self-guide, so about self and then we talk about others, obviously in the community, the connection. I think a lot of what I see right now in psychology and this therapy is you cannot control others. That's why we use the I statement to control what I can do. And I help myself and I understand and I empathize other people. So to be able to name something that should be understood, should be empathized, I feel like then we are putting the expectation on others, and that's so much hard to get. And that will cause all the emotional problems, anger, everything that you do, what you don't do. So what would be your view? And I can see it's very important because I want to be understood. as well. I think that's important on it too. So in your view, so I couldn't see where it goes from self-help, from myself to go to others because I may get disappointed. Now, I think you agree with me. I'm just saying. What do you
It's a yes and. So I think it's great to have first person goals and also to have second person goals. So again, know your rights and know your responsibilities. So I'm not asking us to complete shift. Remember when self-help movement and self-reliance movement came out, there was lots of people that wrote against Ralph Waldo Emerson too, that's really bad, teaching self-reliance. And the truth is, I think it's a yes and. I think we need to be aware of both. Another word, by the way, I mean, just because we're in the social media age, we all want to be envied. So we know envy as a word. We don't have a word for wanting to be envied. And yet that is what's everywhere, right? We just haven't
What about
named
like vanity? Isn't that what it's called?
Vanity and being popular. But that's a little different than wanting to be. What we need are very precise terms of things that we know, like Hamilton's rule for this, right? Because once you name it, then you can actually start to do work on it. And then again, education is important, but I think subliminal education is better because I've seen so many education models fail because of the allergy.
Like a mimetic warfare for good, or like.
Yeah, like okay. So here's one
Sure, the means
for
justify
the
the
Me Too
ends.
movement, right? So Me Too movement is a profoundly important movement. But let me give you a sense of what the bar for consent was 1,000 years ago. Here was a bar for consent 1,000 years ago. You start admiring somebody from afar. You go ask for their hand. There's a virtuous rejection. There's pain and suffering and longing. There's a re-ask, another virtuous rejection. Feeling like you won't be able to live and survive. And then you go out and do something amazing for the community, like slay a dragon that's attacking the village. And you do it
The
with
dragon
valor.
of longevity, like the
Yeah,
dragon of
fire
death in
breather.
Boston's longevity movement.
And then they come back as a hero. And when a hero walks back in the room, it's like knee buckling. And that's the beginning of the love story. That's the way it used to be. It was chivalry. And you die, yeah. Because, low life. But that was good because you didn't have 87 years of potential ways to unravel and get divorced. Anyway, that entire, that was a little window of time. Before then, I'm talking about, the late 90s, right? 1,000 years ago. Romance was under severe oppression of culture and also monastic repression. So the way that window of romance, which lasted about 200 years, emerged was entirely through subversive messaging, subversive campaigning by the troubadours. You guys know the story? Yeah. Okay. So, and by the way, I mean, so this is the thing that Joseph Campbell talks about, the hero's journey, right? You go finish the journey, and you come back to transform, and that's the foundation of the love story. So the troubadours were these community of activists who were lyrical, who bypassed all the monastic and monarchy powers and sang songs about courtly love, about valor and restraint, two things that are completely absent in modern vernacular, right? No one talks about valor, no one talks about restraint anymore. And they embedded that into the minds of the young, and they created 200 years of love stories. So you go through that journey, you slay a dragon, and then there's consent. And then you start your love story. Versus today, what are we asking for? We should be asking a whole lot more out of our men. We need to ask our men to be heroes. And what the women may not understand is that every boy has a hero fantasy. It's ingrained into our brain by evolutionary selection. Every boy is born with a hero fantasy. And that explains our attachment to the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell.
So what are the dragons today?
So the closest thing to a dragon slayer is a fireman. They put out the fire, the fire-breathing dragon. and they do that without harming anybody. They save cats from trees. And I can tell you there's not a single woman who would select against the firemen when it comes to dating. Right? They wouldn't say no. Right? I mean, they wouldn't select against them. I'm not saying they'd say yes. But there's an aura that firemen have today. But imagine if we could ask every man in this country to go be heroes. At the minimum, I think we'd make a better world because all these heroic deeds we've done, right? And then I think we would actually be able to re-elevate the love story where it ought to be, way higher than where it is right now.
What's with the women who want to be heroes?
Them too. Them too.
Heroes everywhere. Okay. I
How would that
think
work? How would that work? How, if a woman's
Just
a
ask
hero-
them. All we got to do is ask.
That doesn't make sense to me. So what's the story? What's the story
Ask
of
them
a
to be.
woman hero?
Ask them to be heroes.
Okay,
Ask
but
them to
how
go
does-
do something amazing.
How does that contribute to a love story, though? Because if that's the driving force. I can tell you firsthand.
yeah.
Like if a man wants to be hero in order to win a woman.
No, so it has to be unconditional. So the key to all this is there's no conditional heroism, right?
Well, you just told us a story about conditional.
No, it was not conditional. So the way it is, the woman never gives. It's not a conditional consent. If you go do this, it's just a virtuous reduction. The man has no hope of actually earning the woman's heart, winning the woman's heart.
Except I've heard about men have these hero fantasies, but the story they've been told all their lives is that if they be the hero, they are owed a woman.
No, they're not. So
Okay, well,
the courtly love, this is unconditional heroism. It's not a conditional consent.
Okay.
So each side is showing restraint, and it's the nidus to do amazing things for the community. And then it's a voluntary consent after that, mutual. Right.
Kara, that's just plausible deniability, right?
I'm sorry?
That's just plausible deniability of the transactional nature of what's happening. Right?
It could be.
All right, I'm
Yeah.
good with what
It's
you said.
yeah, it could be. It's it's the romance. Right.
Like, I think your point was really germane, right? The hero story traditionally requires a damsel, and I mean, you can read the stats on strong women who are taking on heroic feats, right? But not very popular dating objects, right? And I think that's a really big problem because if you're calling everyone to be a hero and love is at the center of this romantic, love is part of how you're intending to mend that divide. I don't know how you fix that. I don't think you do either, right? Yeah.
Being a hero doesn't have to have secondary gain. Just there's no attachment. Many of those men died fighting the dragon, right? It's not, it's not, and it's tragic because not everything works out.
But I think if everybody's a hero, then somebody is gonna be villain. And I think if every man in this room wants to be hero right now, you have to fight each other, and then that's you try to.
all right, without
Like I said
wanting
with the
to get
firemen,
into
like I said with the
everyone
firemen,
versus everyone.
you can do amazing things for the community and harm no one. So we're not asking everybody to be, right now valor, you see it, the medals of valor are in military, which involves saving people, but typically killing people. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
All right, Sam, we're gonna take
My very simple question is the following. So you propose that many of the big problems have been solved in the 20th century and continue to be solved in the 21st century through this process that's unfolding, correct? And what I would like to ask is, sort of like, the use of subversive messaging is basically where you are constructing new words and you're transmitting new words, correctly? Is this correct? Okay. This seems very similar to the work of Edward Bernays in the 1920s, and arguably that was used to great effect for public information, for good. But then also, of course, his book is called Propaganda. The word now has a negative sting because it was also used for
For Hitler, yeah. So this is the issue, right? These have been used by the good and bad guys.
Right. So why did the good guys win? That's my.
Why did the good guys win?
Yes.
So
a further point, who is actually incentivized to be properly caring for the epistemic comments, right? If we go beyond Hamilton's rule, I'm not just learning words from my mom. I'm learning words from you, who are a very good person. But I'm also learning words from Hitler, who is a very bad person. Why do you win?
Well, it's a crowding out effect. And if you're holding the truth, people still have a menu of options. the paths they follow, and the truth generally sets people free. If they hear the things that make sense, like let's say they're hearing competing voices.
Yes.
Shaquille O'Neal is telling you to drink Sprite, and the Surgeon General is telling you don't drink Sprite. But they're both coming through song. If they're coming in equal voices, I think the public has now at least a balanced view and a choice in terms of what they choose.
Okay. So as long as there are multiple voices, you expect the truth to win, and therefore that is why the foundation focuses on the places where there is no other voice, to move from the one thing, 1 versus 99 to like maybe 50-50, and then people will tend to arrive at truth. Is this a fair
They can, or you can outbid them. So,
yeah,
right now the prices of the artistic channels are falling dramatically. So the prices are going down because even the for-profit industry doesn't want to pay. So it's a great time to use the arts as a social impact category, just like the environment, have the arts be a social impact category.
How does this compete versus automation culture work though? Because there's like outbidding in the sense where we can sponsor individual artists to generate the truth, but we can also like run algorithms that create 77 colors of Spider-Man jumping on a train. If you scramble 2-year-olds' brains, how do you compete?
So the idea is to leverage everything that is working, not the things that are not working. So what's working right now, for instance, in pop culture is celebrity. So celebrities want, let's say, $50,000 for placement of this product.
Right.
Then you go bid $51,000, and you ask them to do this.
I see.
They're like, okay, and plus they kind of like it anyway. So like music, right now is being replaced by algorithms. So the algorithms, that's essentially, here's what's happening in the music industry. Basically, it's all about using AI to take the pop songs and generate slightly different sounds. So you get new IP, but you get the benefit of familiarity because we tend to like songs that are familiar. So it's like listening to your favorite song, except it's completely different. So that's what's happening in Hollywood. So they know that works. So we just ask them, okay, I'll pay you more. It's not easy.
Okay, but that actually says that there are funds and resources, right? Sure. Well, thank you, but as a society as a whole, there probably aren't.
That's an I statement. Like I can't solve everybody else's intentions, but I can do it myself. Right? The parts that I can do. Yeah.
So this kind of assumes that when you have like the good guys and the bad guys playing with the same means that they're kind of like 50-50, right? But it seems that one problem that kind of like liberalism or like the good guys these days, like let's say, tend to experience is this problem of like that they care about non-manipulation, right? That they are not willing to use all the means. So I wonder whether there are some means that we shouldn't be using versus media. Is there some kind of do the good ends justify our means?
Yeah, and this is a hard one. So this is the reason why we do it quietly, because people don't want to. That's why my dad's work, like he never talks about it publicly, because people perceive it as propaganda. They want their entertainment to be solidly entertainment. They don't want to think that there's a message embedded in it, right?
But there always is. There must be. There's no
Not always. Not always. Some of them are. I don't think every song has a backer out there, but. But like right now it's a race to the bottom. So music, it's a pretty easy thing to counter these days because we've so overdone commercial maximization. In this decade, the third most used word in lyrics in the Billboard 100 is fuck. So that's the third most used word. There's no mention of valor. There's no mention of restraint. So this is like getting programmed into the young men and women's heads right now. No wonder you end up with like all these violations that are going on. Because that's like, on one hand, this is what they're being programmed, and yet we expect them to behave differently. No, it doesn't work that way. We have to reclaim the arts.
What kind of words would you like to have on the Billboard?
Just look. You can look at the Billboard list of how the words have changed over the last 100 years. It's just stunning. It tells you everything you need to know.
What words would you like to have on
Dragon.
Well, so again, we don't want to give everything away here, but you guys have heard some of this. So treating respect as something you give, not something you get. So the foundation of ganghood is convincing people that you've been disrespected. So if you think about the respect as something you get, you're going to get into a very dark place. If you treat respect as something you give, you don't go there. Your mind doesn't go there, right? Just changing that direction. But we're doing it through propaganda.
Okay, Jazir?
Yeah, so you mentioned that kin selection is very important. Most people want to take care of their own kin because they have genetic similarity. And at the same time, I feel like a lot of people favor people who are mimetically similar, that is, similar in ideas. So I'm wondering at what point you've noticed that tribes or small communities actually rally more around people with mimetic similarity than genetic.
Yeah, so and this is one of the topics I was listed in our talk that we didn't get to cover, but mob mentality is a feature, not a bug, but it's behaving dysfunctionally now, right? So we respond to not only genetic algorithms, but mimetic algorithms. I've always believed in multi-level selection and group selection, even though the people don't like to study group behavior. So right now, as it relates to people organizing around memes, it's both a good thing and a bad thing, especially when it's being used for subversion in a conflict-oriented way, in a way that's not value-creating, in a way that is fomenting hate, and you're seeing a lot of that right now. So humans are prone to both. We're prone to kin altruism, but we're also highly prone to mob behavior. That's kind of the horizontal layer. Kin is very vertical, lineage-wise. And again, it's a feature. They're both features. We are wired to.
Do you see a shift from mimetic affiliation becoming more important, or do you think it's still mostly kin?
No, it's very important because the reason we form mobs is because it builds power. So much of evolution is about power dynamic. So when you're in a weak state, you join memes, mimetic groups to accrue power. That is a defense mechanism and also as a form of greed and offense. But right now, where groups get dangerous, we're all belong to many types of groups simultaneously, some voluntary, some involuntary, some active, some passive, some by birth, some by choice. It's when the departure becomes non-elective is when that's cults, unions, the mob in New York City. When like right now, you don't get killed for stopping a Chicago Cubs fan, but there'll be shaming and potential threats to life and limb when you leave certain groups, and that's when it gets dangerous, because then you get the reign of terror. In history, we've had these things happen. We're very prone to these types of dangerous mobs too, right? You look at the witch hunts, McCarthyism, Cultural Revolution in China, and the reign of terror. And you're seeing elements of that. It hasn't gotten violent yet, but you're seeing incredible amount of shaming. And the way you can tell somebody belongs to a mob is the lack of intellectual honesty, where they truly don't see reality for what it is. So they're running a different part of the brain that the mob runs. The mob as a superorganism will essentially convert these people to agents, and they intellectually cannot see clearly anymore. The way to pop them out of them, the best way is not to have an intellectual conversation with them. You see a lot of people try to shout down mobs, like Brett did in Evergreen. Logical conversation does not work with mobs. You have to use. I'm sorry? No, you got to get on the emotional side. So that's why the best way is these subversive campaigns to get past their blocks, because mobs they're basically intellectually they're owned by the mob. So having a logical conversation with somebody who's complete in right brain doesn't work. You got to do right brain to right brain to break them out of it. By the way, the fact that people aren't doing this shows that we don't understand these phenomena. We don't understand why it's happening. We don't understand what to do.
I view these subversive campaigns as like maybe the best temporary solution. In the long run, do you see like some sort of decentralized way to affect change, or does this just come with like global culture change? So at the moment, I mean, I guess who is deciding what's good and bad, and what?
Yeah. So everything has an agency bias, right? So I know that I've got my biases, and these things are going to get these. Longevity movement, we set it up as a suzerainty, meaning it's all decentralized control. So the longevity, our prize is basically a website. And we don't officiate, we don't have funds, we don't make introductions, we let the community decide, and everybody does their own thing. It's set up like Burning Man. So everybody, you have no, it's not a for-profit or non-profit, it's just, nothing. And you just come under a common narrative and go do amazing things. So I much prefer decentralized structures. So even in this initiative, we're giving the idea away. We give all the IP away.
Do you have any ideas about how to prevent the mob mentality in a decentralized structure?
I do think that subversive campaigns are still the best way to diffuse mobs. It's a thing that's been shown to work. But it's challenging.
Do you think ultimately we should address all these, let's say, psychological biases that we have and try to literally give people the truthful information in like an open and kind of transparent way? Because it might be that by trying to use subversive media, you're perpetuating this kind of like more subversive kind of like way of being manipulated or influenced, right? And that over the long run, or it might be better if you would actually try to appeal to reason, even though that's less effective, right? And we know that it might be on the long run the way to go.
It's a yes and. I don't think there's I mean, obviously you try to go in the front door first. Here's the nice thing about songs, though, guys. So songs is the only form of story listening where you want to hear the same one over and over again. You don't want to watch the same movie over and over again, right? Songs, the way the brain works, you're attracted to the same song. The second thing about songs is that you sing out loud. And studies have shown that if you say something aloud, you believe it. So in terms of subversion, by getting them to sing along, this is why hymns work so well, you start to believe it. Whereas you don't like talk about the movie out loud. You don't read the script, right? The third thing is people love to sing together. So it has this incredible viral effect. So I think songs are still the best way. But yeah, you can just do, direct education. So, and then there's many other ways to hack this too, right? So the best way to teach your kids is to rely on the avuncular. This is the way society used to work. Because we lived in tribes, I taught our boys that at 12, their hormone, testosterone, will kick in, and everything I say is going to be wrong. I've been telling them their whole lives, and then once they hit 13, hopefully they'll remember that I pointed out to them that it's going to seem like I'm wrong, but that's just your hormones talking to you. And then, of course, when they know that you're just wrong, right? So this is where the uncles kick in, because you don't have this allergy. Remember, they have this instinct called dispersion. So the males are all supposed to disperse, so then you don't mate with your own siblings and cousins. So you need genetic diversity. So you're supposed to leave your brood at 12, but we know they know nothing, so we keep them under house arrest until they're 18. But during that window of time, because their minds have closed and they're not supposed to be learning anymore, the fact that we're trying to teach them just doesn't work.
Maybe you could use reverse psychology on them.
Yeah, I mean, you could. Again, these are all different tools.
Sure.
You do everything you can, but we are missing our uncles today. So I run this thing called Man Camp with a friend of mine, Scott. We take up a group of men, and we do our own version of the Bohemian Grove in a small way for like a weekend. And one of the conclusions, bottoms up, out of one of these gatherings is we all need to be uncles to each other because we're not following Hamilton's rule and there's no uncles left anymore. To teach your young boys how to be decent and how to grow up to be men. Then we got to sign up to be each other's uncles, like 10. Because we actually, we imprint on our dad as somebody to listen to for 12 years. And after that, you don't want to hear it.
Well, why do you listen to your uncle?
Because they're not your dad. So remember, you should be listening to your dad, right? You should be listening to both, but you're trying to disperse. And so evolution wired us to not listen. It's literally wiring. The why is that we're wired to not listen to dad. Whereas uncle, you haven't imprinted on. So if the uncle tells you something, and so that's the coaching effect, the mentor, the teachers. All these are archetypal uncles that are in the community that used to serve the growth of young men through their adolescence.
That's the same hold for mothers and aunts too. or
Exactly.
things. I think one, yeah.
So earlier you mentioned an interest in truth seeking, and I was wondering if you would let's say someone wanted to lead or create the future counterculture. What epistemic influences would you recommend, like who or what, for that person?
Oh, Jean-Pierre Barlow would have been awesome. But I will publish his remarks from last year, from the 60s at 50 event. I wasn't going to publish it, but now that he's gone, I think I'm going to just publish all of his words. I think he's a great one. David Foster Wallace is gone as well, but he's a total truth seer. What I love about David Foster Wallace that's different than Jean-Pierre Barlow is that he has an exquisite sensitivity to the ordinary. That's one of the things that is disappearing from the worldview is the ordinary, because when you have this race to the bottom of clickbait, we are right now almost entirely surrounded by clickbait. So think about sugar as clickbait. Think about social media as clickbait. So when we're just swimming in clickbait, we can no longer see things that are incredible, that are ordinary, that are not clickbait. So the most underpriced thing in the world right now, the most extraordinary thing is things that are ordinary.
Yeah, you mentioned this one thing which I always, every time have when I'm at the airport, of like, that the fact that your luggage arrives and no one is stealing it, right? Like these things things tend to work out, right? Like we tend to interact with each other more or less on a respectful level most of the time. And these things seem to work. And like, it is quite banal because there's not really much kind of like, I don't know, sensationalist content gain in like acknowledging this, but it's pretty amazing, I think. And I'm always kind of like humbled by it when things work. Now I realize how well things work in Germany living here. Like I'm suddenly like really humbled by the German system whenever I come back. Healthcare and stuff, it tends to work.
Speaking of healthcare, so there's no money to study the pineal gland, which is kind of the seat of power of psilocybin as well. And that's because the pineal gland never fails. So that tells you pineal gland is probably the most interesting organ, because if it was not important, the fact that it doesn't break down suggests nature's already selected to be virtually perfect, right? So NIH funds things that are brittle, and we don't study things that are robust. So if you look at, what Allison's talking about, there's so many things that are going on in the social system that are so incredibly robust, we can't see it anymore. Like I love the ATM experience because I'm just stunned at that you can put in a piece of plastic, punch a few numbers, and you get exactly what you paid for, and nobody stole. This is very different than Bitcoin, right? So the idea that there's 100% fidelity in these transactions is unprecedented in human history. So that's an example of something that's banal that is absolutely extraordinary.
Okay. In what way is that very different to Bitcoin? People steal.
Well, I've already lost one wallet clean, so it's not 100% fidelity.
Sure. Okay.
And then there's been a hack, But anyway.
Well, I mean, like there's Maya.
I just want to say I love you both so much.
We love you, Maya.
I think like maybe if there's no additional questions, I'm not sure we're doing on time. I would like to kind of like if you could come back to a couple of these like examples, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't really have to be Bitcoin, but if we look at kind of like the underlying like risks, where you said one of the ones that you mentioned is counterparty risk, right? And extrapolate in the future, like where do you see our future threats that we might be facing, which rely on the same mechanisms, like this counterparty risk, or that kind of like that shift?
Right now almost every institution has been mined by counterparties. There's nothing that has remained sacred. So I think we're at that turning point where I think the abuses are so blatantly obvious that even the perpetrators, I think, know it, and I think it's a perfect time to move forward. I do think that blockchain is an example of a solution. So you're talking about. So I think that I'm not worried about future risks. I'm really focused on future opportunities, and not just as a form of existential hope, but I think it's just a reality. I think this is the sort of the low point, right? This is where we've departed the farthest, but we also have the insight to make it better, to do course correction. Hamilton's rule has been only, it's Hamilton. He just passed away a few years ago. It's a really modern concept, and it's not taught in school. You have to kind of hunt for it, and then it's sort of self-evident when you hear it. So nothing has happened yet, right? I mean, I think that's the best news. We are still the early Neanderthals that are crawling out of the swamp right now. We think we're highly evolved. Relative to the future, this is the beginning of human evolution. So I think the best is yet to come. Example of blockchain. So right now, if you look at Facebook or social media, I won't say Facebook. They got successful because they aligned equity ownership effectively. The board used equity effectively to incentivize people to work hard to create this thing called Facebook. But they're much less good at taking care of the customers than they are their equity holders. So right now they're taking a lot of heat for the fact that they're just serving up clickbait to maximize revenue for the quarterly performance, right? So they are, everybody has multiple constituents. They got to serve their shareholders and they got to serve their customers. And the idea of balancing your duties is something that's very hard for people to do. But in blockchain, you can do this because it's unclear who the customer is and who the owner is, right? They're actually in the same pot. So structurally, it'll have a role in creating communities where that balance is really important. So you can make the argument that something like Facebook would have been better as a coin than as a stock, for instance, right? So these are all experiments that have yet to be run, but I think they're coming.
What other systems do you think would be better blockchain? Like at Freezing Moment, we had this thing of it was like a parody pitch of ICOs of does it even blockchain? So if you would, roll out blockchain on a more large scale way, what would be the first ones that you would tackle with it?
The use cases that create alignment. So there's one that's coming out called Handshake, which was started by our group purely for the purposes of creating alignment. So that itself is its own little innovation.
What does Handshake do?
I think I can talk about it. I mean, it's not launched yet, but it's so basically it has to do with domain names and IP addresses. But the innovation really is proportionality of benefit among the users in the community to maximize alignment of all the token holders. Now, that's something that ICOs are not doing well right now. So there's so much violation that's going on. So it's not a problem of ICOs or blockchain. It's a problem of human factors, of not actually understanding Hamilton's rule and human behavior, and to construct regimes that make it work. So I think that's all coming, right? Handshake would be probably one of many examples where proper alignment and goal congruence of the community is the number one priority.
We've talked a lot about, I think, goal congruence, or at least more different counterparty risk on a scale of versus corporations versus individuals. I'm wondering of how that would apply on nation state level, right? For example, one thing that in AI safety we're worried about now is not only the actual AI alignment, or the goal alignment of AIs, but really cooperation also between nation states, or how that ensuring that there won't be a race, or that if there's a race, that there's no cutting corners, right? So how do you feel alignment could be tackled on a more international level?
Well,
we tend to joke that
yeah.
the way to get nation states aligned on the AI safety issue is by introducing an alien threat, or something that drives it home that we have to work together as humanity in AI alignment. And I think you've mentioned something similar before, right? Where there's always this kind of mimetic parallax of one versus the other, and a way that you might get two parties to collaborate is by introducing an external threat.
Yeah, like death, aging, right? So aging is a common enemy. So you can organize all the disparate countries and communities around a common goal. So that's what longevity is become a global movement, because it's something that we have in common. As it relates to building better countries, so with the proper alignment, the race to the bottom becomes a race to the top. So if you look at what's happening in terms of, so one of the unintended consequences of longevity is that we depopulate. This is completely contrary to Malthusian expectations. And Ben Franklin was the first one to write about the calamity of overpopulation. But empirically, it turns out that longevity always induces depopulation for a whole host of psychosocial reasons. My favorite one is the fact that when your lifespan is short, you start having babies young, right? When you're Juliet was 13 when she said yes to Romeo, and that's because expected lifespan was 22. But now that we're not dying at 22 anymore, at 22, yeah, you say I do, and even if you make a bad call, you only have 9 years of hell ahead of you. But now that we're living to 100, expected lifespan for kids now is 100. People don't say I do at 13 anymore. They wait until their 20s, 30s, 40s. Maybe they have one kid. So right now, depopulation is the only thing we're seeing in high longevity countries. Now, so in that environment, what we're seeing now, I think we're at the beginning of this, where the country is going to compete for people. So the narrative is scarcity. The earth is full. Natural resources are more scarce than people, so you want to kill each other, reduce each other's human resources for natural resources. But once you realize human resources are more scarce than natural resources, you don't kill people for oil anymore. In fact, you've got to attract people to your country. So 40% of the world right now is depopulating. 60% that are low prosperity are still supplying us talent. That's the immigration, right? So directionally, we're headed towards a first world of prosperity spreading everywhere, and all prosperous countries are depopulating. So you're going to eventually hit a state where population is stable or potentially in decline. So in that kind of world, we're going to be trying to build mythical walls to keep people in. That wall will be being a great country. You want to be the best country you can to attract talent. This is what America's so good at right now, right? I mean, nobody goes to Japan because you can't get citizenship, no matter who you are and what you do. So they're going to really struggle.
Well, it was pretty hard for me last year here with the visa.
It's hard, yeah. And it's hard. It's been hard for my family too. But we're still an amazing country in terms of a place to be. So people want to come here. So demand is very high here.
Mm-hmm. Japan will usually also will other you even if you have citizenship. That even if you become a Japanese citizen by marriage, you are still not Japanese and you can never become.
Yeah, they classify it differently, right? So the future is going to not look like that, because when you're facing depopulation, it's going to be a race to the top to be the best country you can. You're seeing this in blockchain, where even as different countries do different things, the countries are trying to be the best country they can because they want you to come there, right? So that's this is the beginning of the shift of nation states being a race to the top.
All right.
Okay, we should probably.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up. Is there any one last question? No? Okay, Josh.
How do you think about the nature of proof of work architectures versus proof of stake architectures, and particularly the relation to nation state imperatives in disrupting those particular blockchains?
I don't know.
Okay. Sasha in the back, maybe? Well, we have time afterwards to do that.
A quick question. I really appreciated your talk. I wasn't sure if I misheard you in the beginning. Were you saying climate change was sort of fell along 50-50 lines in terms of, let's say, the opinion of the general population, or?
I'm approximating. It might be 80-20. So anything that's not 1 in 99, I like the fact that there's multiple points of view. Do I have a personal view on that? I don't know. I've looked at the data on both sides, and I love the fact that people, in the same way that I've never voted in this country. We came here because we trust the American people. I've heard the red point of view and the blue point of view, and I can tell you neither side is 100% correct. That's the only thing I know for sure. As to which proportion they are, I don't know. But in terms of allocation of my time, given opportunity obesity, I just focus on very few things. I focus on the 1%.
Well, I appreciate that. I would just respectfully add, as a climate scientist, that I think among atmospheric scientists, it's 99% and one. And it's
God, let's not start a counterculture.
the most important issue for us to grapple with. I would put that perspective.
Yeah, and I totally respect that point of view.
Right. So we did like pretty wild crisscross today, both in like time, also across multiple different domains. I really appreciated this. If you had like one takeaway, which would be more an actionable item for people to execute really in their daily lives as we try to build this like counterculture movement, what are like actionable?
Just rewrite everything as an I statement, all your work to be done.
All right. And then on the Facebook group, if you could post the papers that you referenced. And
I will do. So I'll invite folks that I think there was a Facebook invite, so I'll invite everybody to the counterculture page.
And
then,
mention the event again.
Yeah, March 10th. I'll post it on there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to, if I could say a few more things about kind of upcoming events at Foresight. Like I'm gonna post them onto the Facebook group as well. The next salon in this evolutionary kind of salon series is March 19 with Robin Hanson. That will be like on the evolution of our like social contract more or less, and how we trick ourselves into thinking that we're better than we are. Then the one afterwards, I think that will be already the one with IndieBio on our biological evolution. And we will have another one on AI safety at the Internet Archive on AIs as corporations, also in April. But I'll post all of these on the website. And if you work in AI, nanotechnology, and blockchain or cybersecurity, please apply to our fellowship. We also have an upcoming workshop with Nobel Prize winner Sir Fraser Stoddart on nanotechnology, and you can apply to that workshop directly. All of this, like brain dump, I will also write on the Facebook group. I just wanted to flag it, and yeah, I'd be really glad if you applied. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Joan. It was really a wonderful salon. Gave me a lot of ideas for the embassy to experiment with, actually. But it felt very aligned. The salon are taking a little holiday break in France, so they will resume March 8th. Hopefully, we are always looking for speakers. So if you have a burning question you would like to discuss with 30 or 40 people, I don't think we can do much more than this, actually. It would be really wonderful. I definitely need some people, so please come talk to me. I'm happy to give tours of the house to explain what we do here. And finally, these events are always free. That's also our vision of this future society. We have a donation jar, of course. Donations are always welcome. They are really not mandatory. We don't make any money on it. It's just for your champagne and for Alison champagne, actually, and for the 8th Street Commons Fund, which I can also talk to you about and contribute to building this future society. If you don't have money, or maybe you don't want to participate this time, we really appreciate other form of help, like bringing your glass in the kitchen and putting it in the dishwasher. It's a small thing, but it's always nice in the community. Thank you so much all. Have a really good night, and feel free to hang out. Nobody is kicked out. You can have more wine and continue this really interesting conversation. Good night.
Thank you.